Welcome to Drinking from the Fire Hose. I'm Roger Wilcox. I'm co-hosting this series with Murray Macmillan, who you'll see shortly. This video is aimed at equipping managers to improve their team's performance. The focus of the video is on standards and unifying your team to deliver repeatable results. We're going to give you some practical tips how to do that, and at the end of the video, we'll leave you with an activation, enabling you to immediately put into practice what you've heard. So what's the goal? The goal is to use standards to unify the team around consistently delivering repeatable results, and in turn, consistently delivering excellent outcomes. Why is it important for leaders to establish and use standards? Well, firstly, standards show what good should look like. They're not to be confused with procedures, which give a step-by-step process on how to do something, but rather standards set expectations and show the reader how to achieve repeatable results. They enable new or improved ways of working to be locked in by the team. And one of the real advantages of establishing clear standards is that your customer gets exactly what they expect, regardless of who's doing the task. As an example, when I have contractors working for me, I have an expenses standard, which visually shows what's required for each of them to deliver expense claims in a consistent format. This helps me submit consistently, write first-time expense claims to clients. It eliminates rework and admin burden, and it helps my company, Matrix Solutions, actually get paid by clients on time. This in turn ensures that my contractors get paid on time. Standards are especially important for site-based personnel to use, and we'll give some examples of that. However, as this example just shows, standards are also valuable for office-based personnel to use. So now over to Murray.
Thanks, Roger. The standards also link very well to a lot of the subjects we've been talking about in previous videos. So if you're identifying improvements and implementing improvements, a standard is a great way to lock that down. So as you say, everybody's doing it the same way and we're getting that repeatability. And repeatability is good. You make sure you get the same outcome every time. So just a nice, clear visual standard will help, make sure we can repeat, and it works out every time. It's also a great way, and it feeds into the improvement stuff and the problem solving we've spoken about before. If you're having errors and issues, you want to problem solve, you want to tackle that, and then put a standard in place. And that will hopefully help, at the very least, reduce the errors and the issues you're having. And I guess my only other point on that is that it's not a one-stop shop. So once you've done it, that doesn't mean you leave it for 10 years. You probably want to keep revisiting. And as we've said through many other videos, can we improve? Can we change? Can we update it? So yeah, I mean, fairly key and very, very sort of key part of supporting improvements in general. So I guess the next part is current performance. So where are you at the moment? One of the obvious things is, do you or your team have standards in place? And if you were to wander around your office space or your working environment, do you have, easy to see, easy to find standards in place? If not, well, great, there's an opportunity. Maybe it's something worth considering to get them in place. Also, are they simple and very visual? This has come across in many of the videos as well. You want something that's easy to understand. You can look at it, catch your eye, and it tells you at a glance what you need to do, what the standard is. You don't really want one, and Roger and I have both seen them, where you need a doctorate to understand them. There's so much technical jargon in there, it's actually quite hard to figure out what to do. It should be really simple and obvious what the standard is and how to meet it. And I guess, part of that is, have they become properly embedded? Is it now established as how we do things around here? And hopefully it is. There is a danger though, if you don't have standards or if they're out of date, where there are gaps, there's a risk that that's become how you do things around here. And maybe that's why you're having issues and problems. So again, do the improvement, get the standard in place, and it's a good way to repeat that good behavior and that new higher standard. And I guess to support that and to help drive that forward, make sure people are aware of them, are trained in them, and especially when you bring in new team members or new people to the organization, talk them through the standards, explain to them why they're important, and ideally where they came from. So rather than just saying, you must meet the standard, here's why we developed the standard, here's maybe some of the issues we had, here's what we changed and improved, and now we have this higher performance standard that we all follow. So engagement, fairly key in there. Anything else to add to that, Roger?
No, I think that's good list, Murray. So that's really about how you assess performance, how you currently are. So what we're going to move on to now is how to achieve what we're set out to do, which is establish these good standards in place and get repeatable results. I'd say the first starting point is to decide what activities need a standard. And there's a clue here, not everything does actually need a standard. So you need to make a decision. Now, some of the things that you need to think about and work with your team on is, where do repeat failures keep occurring? Now, I'll give it an example which is common to many people who work in the offshore industry. I know Murray and I have talked about this and seen this in many places. But one example, when I was talking about standards with a site-based team, what they saw was that they were in a control room, and they recognized that one of the repeat failures that they regularly saw was that people would come in with a radio and they'd leave it on the side, or they'd come in with a gas monitor, they'd leave it somewhere, and the next shift when they came in, they'd pick it up and the batteries had gone. And so then they had to scrabble around to try and find a phone or something else to get over it. Maybe they had to go and charge up their the gas detector or the radio. So one of the things that when this came about, the team leader and the team sat down together and said, well, how do we create a standard around this? What is a standard that we want to set? And so the standard was very simple. They took a table and they put a station on top of it with all the radio chargers in one row, and then all the gas detector chargers in a row behind that. And the standard became, everybody who came into the control room, the first thing they did at the end of the shift was to put in their radio, put in their gas detector into the charger bank. And that was the standard. It was very visual. It was a photograph which showed this is what good looks like, and this is how to achieve the standard. And because the team were involved in it, and it was one of the nuisance things for them, they did that. Now, the important thing, as Murray said, is about engagement as well. So they engaged the other shifts in why this is important to them and how can other shifts do it. Now, it became self-reinforcing that the teams came in. That's just how they did things going forward, and it was a great improvement. So that's one example where repeat failures kept occurring, and so they established a standard around it. I'd say another one is where customer satisfaction is really important. If you want to achieve a certain outcome every time, and when you want to achieve visual standards as well, maybe for a workplace where you've set up a place, your office or your site, and you want it to consistently look that way, then set a visual standard and say, this is what it should look like. For your office, look at you take a photo and say, this is what my office should look like. It should have this over here. It should have this over here. It makes it efficient. It makes it clean. It makes it easy to use. So over to Murray. Any other thoughts on that?
Yeah, one I think you put in there already, Roger, is not everything needs a standard. So, I mean, I think we've probably both worked in places where it's like standard overkill. I think you've got to allow people some, give them recognition that they're not everything needs it. They can use their own sort of intuition at times, but certain tasks, absolutely, it's key, whether it's a safety task or just one that you want to focus on. But yeah, don't go crazy with it, or you'll dilute the benefit of them. So what do these look like? I think, for me, the simplest ones are just one pagers. Have something very visual, simple one page, not too many words on it. And what you're trying to do is show what good looks like. Because again, it's dangerous to make an assumption that everybody knows what good looks like. And we're seeing this with a lot of clients and a lot of different subjects at the moment. So make it very clear, this is what we want. And something that occurred to me yesterday, a really kind of daft example. If you go into the Royal Mail website, there is a standard for how an envelope should look when you address it. Sounds really simple, but you can imagine there are people, first time they're writing a letter or sending a letter. So you need a name, you need an address, you need a postcode, and your stamp goes up at the top corner. So very, very clear, very, very visual, but that way, most of the time, most people will get it right. And again, it's simple to read and it's simple to understand. And I guess with all these standards, like many things we've spoken about before, you want it to be practical and you want it to be fit for purpose. So again, don't get carried away making it too complicated. Just, and it's probably been very clear about why we're doing the standard in the first place. What is the purpose of the standard? The standard is to have a clean desk area. Just focus on the desk then. Don't start bringing other things to the standard. Keep it really clear, fit for purpose. And then it's much more likely that people will use it and follow it.
I like that, Murray. I like as well places where you'd expect to see some consistency. So we were talking earlier, Murray, about McDonald's. And if you go to McDonald's in Seattle, or you go to McDonald's in Edinburgh or Aberdeen or London or wherever you go, and you ask for a Big Mac, guess what? You're going to get the same McDonald's Big Mac, looking the same way, being delivered the same way. It's not misshapen. It's just a Big Mac. Now that is a standard, and so you could easily see having the picture of the Big Mac showing what it should look like versus what it shouldn't look like. So again, make it very visual, as Murray said. I think the other thing which is really important, especially for leaders, is how to engage a team. Firstly, engaging your team to improve the standard. So as I talked about there before, the team, when they were focused on gas detectors and radios, what they needed to do was actually involve the team. Now, some of them actually came up with further improvements. What they did originally was put up the table, and they put just the gas detectors on and the chargers, etc. However, they recognized that when they were coming into the control room, that wasn't where they were going to be. They'd actually set up the table in the wrong area. So one of the team members said, look, this is absolutely crazy. You know, I can do that, but my coat's over here. Why don't we actually move the table, put it by the coats? So that is very visual. I just naturally go there, take this off whilst I'm hanging up the coat. So that was a good improvement. So actually engaging your team is so important. So to help improve it, but also as you engage people in how to come up with new ideas, how to improve it, it actually gets them engaged. And all these people start to own the outcome, so that once you've got the standard developed, they understand why it's important and they actually own it as well. So back over to you, Murray.
Okay, I guess to finish off this section on it is from a leader's point of view, what's important to put in place. So it's also very important you put the training in place to help people understand why we have the standard and potentially what the implication is of not following it. Are there safety implications? Are there financial implications? So, you know, help with that, make sure people are trained, and you put in any other support to help them do it. And, you know, again, using the offshore one as an example, if one of the standards is you must have little foam inserts in your ears before you go out in the plant, make sure there's plenty of foam inserts. You want to make it easy for people to comply with this. And it's, again, the purpose of complying is to make the task easier, more efficient, safer. You're not trying to catch people out by not following the standards. You're trying to make work easier, more enjoyable, more efficient. So that standard is there to help people, not there to catch them out. So again, make it as easy as possible for people to comply with that. And I guess the final part on this is it's a bit like the activation, is go see and assess, keep going and checking how these things are working. Do we have the standards in place? Are they the right standards? Are people looking at them? You know, if you go and talk to your team, can they point to the right standard? Can they recognize it? And again, making sure, you know, it's valid, it's relevant, and it's in the right place. There's no point in having, again, I'll use my offshore analogy for what you wear to head outside. Typically, it's in the locker room just before you head out onto the plant. There's not an awful lot of point in having that in the canteen, because you're sitting down to your meal, you're not thinking about what you wear when you go outside. But have it in the place so it's front and center in your eyesight just before you go final check. So again, just make sure it's relevant, it's in the right place, right information, and it's easy for people to comply.
Yeah, that's good. I think one of the things we were talking about earlier, Murray, was about you're less likely to make mistakes and errors with a standard in place. But if you do, standards actually help you identify what went wrong. And we were talking about that and talking about checklists and the use of those in some industries. And, you know, oftentimes we go through and we use a rigorous checklist and go through, but the standard isn't the checklist. And this is, again, the distinction. The actual standard says, well, to do this task, use a checklist. And it may actually specify, for this checklist, I want you to tick every box. So that's the standard. Now, the checklist is something different, but if something goes wrong when that activity is taking place, then the leader's role is to go back and assess, well, let's look at the standard. Let's look at that and see, what does it say? And in that case, it'll say, well, use the checklist. So did you use the checklist? Yes. Okay, the next part of the standard is tick every box. Did you tick every box? Well, not exactly. I maybe missed one here. And therefore, you can use the standards as well to help understand what should have happened, and where errors have crept in. And then again, update the standard to ensure that they're up to date. And so that links into the Go See Assesses. As a leader, what you should be doing is go out, as we described in one of our earlier videos, and conducting Go See Assesses. A really good one is to take a standard and say, well, what's the standard? Let's go and have a look, have a conversation with people about, well, this is what should be happening. What actually is happening in practice? So that's how I'd do another thing for a leader. So how to achieve that. So back over to you, Murray.
Okay, so once we've got all that in place and all these things are hopefully happening, what are the observable behaviors? What are we going to see and hear and feel, which gives us some comfort that these things are in use and are being used properly? So I guess an obvious one for what you will see is you'll see that standards are visible around the workplace. So it's a fairly obvious one, but it's a good check. Can I actually see them? Are they around the workplace? And are people looking at them? It's always nice to see if people are interacting with them and looking at them. And if they are, I would, there's no harm in asking them, is it easy to understand? Is there anything you would change? Is there anything you would update? Again, engage them in this. And you should also see people doing things consistently. That should start to become more obvious, especially if this is coming in the back of a number of errors or mistakes. We've made an improvement in the process and now we've got a standard. You should see things happening more consistently. And again, just going back to your McDonald's example, you should see every single Big Mac going to the counter looking exactly the same. It shouldn't be my interpretation of it and the next person's interpretation of it. It should be the same every time. So over to what you might hear around the workplace, Roger.
Yeah, I think that's really good, though, is what you'll see. I think what you'll hear is people actually talking about standards, referring to them. They'll also talk about expectations. So what's the standard actually saying? What's the expectation? So again, referring back to the example of the radios and the gas monitors, it became the norm that when people came in and they forgot to take one off, that people would say, well, look, that's the standard. This is the standard we have around here. You should be leaving it over here. And then that coaching conversation identified, well, how can people improve? How can they maintain the standard? So yeah, that's what you'd hear. Maybe back over to Murray, as my throat's just about to go.
So what you should feel, apart from a tricky throat, is you should feel that things are being done consistently and repeatedly. And that, for almost every workplace, that's so important that we get things, consistent all the way through. And what, so that feeling is really important, but it also then gives you confidence when you're perhaps looking to improve something. So if we've got this one embedded, we've got a set standard that everybody's following, now's another chance to take a look and go, can we make it even better? Or is it absolutely fine and we can leave it alone and accept that this is now the standards? But it's a really good place to be when you can almost relax a little bit and you know that this particular task is now being done consistently, time after time after time. Right, let's move on to something else and see where else we can make an improvement.
Yeah, that's good. So over to the activations. One of the things we've said is we'd like at the end of every video to leave you with an activation so you can immediately put into effect what you've heard. So our first one would be go and do a go see and assess on your team. So take a standard, take one that you've got, go out with them, speak to the team. How are they meeting that? Are they still complying with the standard? Have you learned anything? And I guess there's a follow-on on that as well, that oftentimes the leader, they set the standard. So if you're not complying with the standard, then your team probably aren't. So that'll give you a good indication as well for yourself. Am I actually complying with this? Then check with your team. Are they complying with that as well? So that'd be a good one. I think the other one is to review your team standards. Have a look at them. Are they up to date and are they still valid? It's very easy to look at the standards and let them get out of date. I think Murray, on his earlier video, we said on the 10-minute video, gave an example that maybe the gas detector is out of date now. So actually spend some time, look at your picture, and is it the right one? Is it up to date? Is it still valid? So those are the two activations I'd suggest you go and do. So conduct your go see and assess and review your team standards. So over to Murray.
Thanks, Roger. One I would add into there, and it was a point you made, I think is absolutely critical, is that you as the leader, you have to be following these standards. You have to identify them and comply with them. And it's something we've used with our improvement champions over the years as well, is reminding people that you're an ambassador for these things. You ought to be setting the standard as well. So it's really important you comply with them. And I think, again, depending on your workplace, also very important when you have visitors in, whether it's a manufacturing plant or an office environment. If there are standards, it's really important that you comply with them as well and observe them. And where relevant, explain them to your visitors. Because if it doesn't look like you're complying with it, then why should anybody else bother? So I think it's very, very important that you're an ambassador for that as well, and you literally set the standard and observe that standard. So final thing, and once again in the video, a lot of what we're suggesting and recommending is very visual. So as part of the go and do it, the call to action is go and try this, make it happen. And when you're doing it, we would love to see your examples. So if you come up with some examples of perhaps an old standard and now how you've improved it into the better version, we would love to see that. And likewise, is when you're doing this, when you're putting this into action, any issues, any problems, any hurdles, get in touch. We've done this for a long time. We've seen lots of good and bad examples. So if you're struggling at all, please feel free to get in touch. And I'm sure we can give you some tips and tricks to help you move you on with it. But as always, good luck and look forward to seeing you on the next video.